keeping you up to speed on all your Colorado teams. It's time for Coffee Break.
Happy Tuesday to you all out there. A blistery Tuesday. I hope y'all are staying safe out on the roads out there if you got to commute. And I hope that the Broncos are paying attention to the weather today, because it could look pretty similar to what they're going to experience at Orchard Park as they take on the Bills in their first postseason berth since Super Bowl 50. I'm going to bring in my friend James Palmer, NFL insider to the stars, because I want to get into the Broncos a little bit here. As I mentioned, they've clinched the postseason. It came down to the last game, so we had to make it interesting. But they handled the Chiefs B squad about as effectively as you could have imagined. And they're here, so they have a tough test ahead of them. But James, just on the offset, because I won't get to talk to you again until the conclusion of this game, what is your overall early impression of this Broncos-Bills matchup?
So we were taping a segment that's going to come out. I'm not sure which day. It's up to the editors. Steve Smith and I, for our show 89, I wanted to talk about the Broncos. And so Steve was kind of like, yeah, okay. And then I started kind of breaking this down a little bit about, what's going on, and then obviously pushing it forward to this game a little bit. And I started talking about the defense, and I started talking about, well, what do you think Steve VJ's going to do with Pat Surtain in terms of moving him around? And Steve's eyes kind of lit up, and he was like, there's a lot of different things they could do as a defense to try to match up and help their chances against Josh Allen and company. And we started going down this rabbit hole of, you could put Patrick Surtain on Dalton Kincaid at times. You can put him outside against Amari Cooper. But this offense is built down the middle of the field. That is where they attack you. That's where they make their hay, whether it's with their backs, whether it's with either one of the tight ends. We all know how good Shakir is. And would his assistance in this defense be more appropriately used in the middle of the field? Might be something that we see at times in this game. I think his versatility and ability and size, and Steve went against him and made the comparison of Aqib Talib and how he used to go against Gronk. Mm-hmm. And Steve remembers in the Super Bowl against his Panthers when they put Talib at times on Greg Olsen because he was their best pass catcher really on that team. And Pat has a similar skill set because of a similar size. And I think that's going to be something to watch in this game and down the road in how Patrick Surtain as a chess piece is used because of the size and the versatility. I think Steve started going, well, now this game's way more interesting to me. He started getting into it, and I was like, no, I think the Broncos legitimately have a chance in this game. We can talk about a couple of the matchups that I like, but first things off, I think the way the defense could be malleable is interesting.
James, what's the status of Amari Cooper heading into this game? I think there was some reports that he was away from the team for personal or team reasons or otherwise. What's going on with Amari Cooper?
Yeah, he was excused for that finale that nobody was going to play in. He was a little banged up as well. He's going to play in this game. I mean, he'll be out there. But the point I made with Pat is we know Amari's a good receiver. He is a good receiver. This team is not really built outside the numbers. They don't attack you outside the numbers a whole lot. It was why they traded for Amari Cooper. I remember talking to a number of defensive coordinators early in the season before the trade happened that had gone against the Bills, and they were like, oh no, this team is the league has figured them out about where they go, and you put all your resources in the middle of the field. You put extra resources at Josh Allen to try to get to him, and you don't even worry about the outside the numbers, and you play man out there. If defense coordinators are telling me that, obviously Brandon Beane knows that, right? And the coaching staff with Sean McDermott knows that. And it's why they went out and made the trade for Amari Cooper. It's why they gave up a third-round pick for a rental, essentially, because Amari was not going to be a part of the Browns' plans and is going to be a free agent. So, that showed you the desperation on the outside that the Bills had and needed to fill, because Keon Coleman just really hasn't developed quite yet on the outside. I still think that hasn't dramatically changed. I still think the Broncos can put their resources more towards Josh Allen, more towards getting after the quarterback. 63 sacks is insane. And keep pressuring up front and see if you take some chances on the outside of leaving a corner man-to-man out there without help. And seeing if that can work out in your favor. And it may be the way, you have to play to win this game.
James, we saw with the Bengals that the Broncos just had a hard time kind of blanketing that bevy of talent that they have between Gesicki and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Chase Brown, who could catch things out of the backfield and things of that nature. Even though it may not have the same name value in terms of Buffalo's skill position set, do you think that they possess a similar threat in that they don't, while they may not have a Jamar Chase anywhere on the field, they have guys that are capable, especially in the middle of the field, where we saw the Bengals and other teams throughout the years kind of exploit a weakness within the Broncos' defensive front there?
Yeah, Richie, it is a far cry to say they don't have a Jamar Chase. Well, nobody has a Jamar Chase. I mean, he's the Triple Crown winner, and the Broncos should be thankful that they don't have to go against a player of that caliber in these skill positions. But Khalil Shakir is about as good of a slot as you could see in the NFL. He is so underrated, and if you talk to coaches, they will just rave about the guy. I was talking to a DB coach that's gone against them like 2 weeks ago, and he was like, bro, he is so good. He is so good. And I do think the Broncos have a very good nickel corner, and Jaquan McMillan's going to have his hands full. But I think the real advantage that Buffalo has that Denver's going to need to figure out is James Cook catching the ball out of the backfield. I mean, you don't have a linebacker that can line up with him. You don't have a linebacker that can stay with him. I don't know how many teams do have a linebacker that can stay with him. And his ability to maybe get a chip, which this happens a lot. He chips and slows down either Nick Bonito or Jonathan Cooper, and then he leaks out into a route. And, you know, obviously Josh has such a good feel for where he is at all times. I think that might be the biggest challenge that Denver has, is finding a way to slow that aspect of this offense down. But you are right in terms of the way the ball gets spread around. With Joe Brady heading into this year, their offensive coordinator, I was told the plan was we don't really have a go-to. Every play may start with a different player as the number one read on the progression, whether it's Kincaid, whether it's Knox, whether it's Cook, whether it's, you know, well, he wasn't there at the beginning of the year, but Amari Cooper, like the ability for Josh to kind of just not force feed anyone, which he's had issues with in the past. He fell in love with Gabe Davis just as a guy and as a buddy, and like just wanted to get him the ball. We knew he needed to get touches to Stephon Diggs because of that situation, and Steph needs volume to be a good receiver. They were going to really accentuate the fact that that wasn't the case anymore, and that's why that offense flourished this year in a rebuilding year for Buffalo.
Do you think that and you alluded to the curious case of what do you do with Patrick Surtain? Do you think because of the way the Broncos defense is constructed and because they have a premier chess piece like Pat Surtain, that it's easier to game plan against a team that just has a bona fide number one option, be it a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams, or something where it's like, hey, Pat Surtain is going to mirror this guy all day. We saw him do it a lot with Brock Bowers when they played the Raiders. But when they don't have it, it can kind of come from anywhere. And to your point, if they have a different number one read on everything, do you think that that presents a harder challenge in terms of how to scheme on a play-to-play, drive-to-drive basis?
Oof, that's a good question. I would say it's kind of apples and oranges if the receiver is just an outside receiver and Pat's going to shadow him. But to use Chase as an example, like he lines up everywhere. He lines up in the slot. This offseason, he learned all the wide receiver positions because they wanted to move him around. So that changes the fact a little bit, right, in the way that you operate as a defense, because then Pat is moving around much more, which means every other piece needs to move around much more. But I get what you're saying. Without the one premier talent out there as a pass catcher, it does alter, I think, what an offense does first, and then how do you combat it. I think in this offense, the balls are not forced anywhere. So I wonder, we see less of Pat moving around and more of Pat being used in certain situations. You go a bunch and Kincaid's out there wide, well, like maybe there's a switch. And I think that's a positive of this secondary, is there's really good communication, and Pat can switch onto Kincaid if they move or if they motion, however they do it. But you're right. I think it does maybe make things a little bit more complicated, but probably for anybody that you're going against, when you have really just a bunch of B-plus skill guys and they all can make plays, that's sometimes what offensive coordinators are looking for. And when you have a skill like Pat, I think that then that's when his versatility probably comes more into play than his ability to shadow, which is equally great.
before I transition here, because I want to get into Vance Joseph a little bit as well, I just want to let everybody out there, if you're watching us on our YouTube channel or on social media, we're doing an Ask Me Anything with James Palmer here on the back half of the show. So go ahead and start firing your questions in.
There's no chats yet,
yeah,
but it's okay.
Go ahead and start firing your questions in. We got James can see him on his end. We got Trey behind the scenes here on the ones and twos. And I've got one that I'm going to lead off with that I want to ask James. Before I do that, we've talked about Vance Joseph and the task that he's going to have in terms of trying to corral MVP candidate in Josh Allen and just a bevy of offensive weapons. But Vance Joseph's also going to have to juggle potentially lining up some head coaching interviews. We saw his name get pulled earlier this week. What, if anything, have you heard about the prospect of Vance Joseph right now as a head coaching candidate in 2026, 2025, 2026?
I would say, Richie, honestly, the biggest thing is that he's getting interviews again. Mm-hmm. That's step one for changing your perception in the NFL. And I think his perception has been dramatically changed. I think the right people do know that his first shot as a head coach was not a real shot, and he had no say at all. And I think it did prove to people that he was willing to come back to Denver, where he was fired as a head coach, succeed the way he's succeeded, bounce back from the start 2 years ago to the way they finished last year and then the way they played throughout this course of this entire season without the headliners or big household names outside of Patrick Surtain, has made the league start to make a turn and say, is this guy worthy of another shot? Because it has become in vogue, I would say, last season for sure, and this season once again, that head coaches getting their second opportunity is very, very appealing to these openings. You saw Dan Quinn and the success that he had this year. You saw Jim Harbaugh and the success he had this year. I would say Kirk Cousins is more at fault than Raheem Morris in the Falcons season, but Raheem had a pretty strong season in an organization that has struggled. And now you look at all of these guys that are getting these looks. I mean, Mike Vrabel, in my opinion, is a hotter candidate than Ben Johnson. 100%, just because of everything he brings and the experience he brings. You look at all of these teams, they're very interested in bringing in a head coach, Vance Joseph included, that's been through it before. And I don't know if everybody at home knows the stuff you learn the first time you have a head coaching experience. You didn't even know how to really hire a staff. And I've talked to guys about this who are now in this second cycle as a candidate, and they've had head coaching experience. They're like, man, I didn't even know the questions to ask really these position coaches that I'm trying to put together on a staff. Like, I'm so much different as a leader and what I would need out of each one of these once I've been through it, right? You don't know that your doors get knocked on constantly, from everybody in the organization pulling you 1,000 different ways. That's why these teams are looking at VJ and all of these other guys that have head coaching experience, because the league lacks patience. And if you have a guy who's done it before, there's a better chance of him turning it around a little bit quicker. And so realistic chances, I don't know how realistic they are this time around. Getting your name back in the circuit in terms of interviews is extremely important, and VJ has done that. I do know for a fact he's not even thinking about the interviews. I've had some conversations about that. And remember, they're all virtual now anyways because of the rules. And so his focus is on Buffalo, but I do think he understands, and most of these other guys that are still coaching understand, the best thing you can do is keep winning football games and playing well when there's fewer games on the air to kind of audition for everybody else. I think Sean hinted at Aaron Glenn doing that the other night.
Well, as you alluded to VJ's first trip around the sun here as a head coach, and it's common knowledge now, and it's come out on the record that he didn't have a lot of control. He was set up to fail in a lot of ways, and a lot of that had to do with the dysfunctional setup of the Broncos as an organization, more so than anything. But he's also been very vocal on the record and behind the scenes that he wants another opportunity. And I think that, frankly, the fact that the Broncos have a coordinator who is, being brought up and being put into the cycle as these teams kind of go through their Black Monday firings is another indication of a team that's on the rise. And that kind of feeds into my first question for the James Palmer Ask Me Anything is, James, after securing their first postseason berth since 2015 and their first winning season since 2016, and kind of outpacing the projection nationally and locally, are the Broncos actually done rebuilding and now retooling, or is there still a rebuild that needs to happen here, as was evidenced by drafting Bo Nix in the first place?
I don't think you win 10 games and you're still in a rebuild. Like, I don't think you are. I think you're now, you have, I think VJ stays, but you have your defensive coordinator. You have your play caller and head coach. You have your quarterback. You have a potential, in my mind, defensive player of the year playing corner. You locked up Jonathan Cooper. You have Zach Allen. Locking up Nick Benito would be a smart play. You have pieces. Now you locked up Garrett Bowles, your left tackle. You have a line that is intact. Now I think you're retooling. I think that's the word, that probably best fits this. You need a back. You need a tight end. Do you add a veteran receiver to this group to play opposite of Courtland Sutton? That's a decision that Sean Payton needs to make, or is he going to keep watching the development of Devon Vele and Troy Franklin? I think they're in a retooling situation. I think you're going to get yourself out of this salary cap hell that they're still able to win games with. You've proven that the cream of the crop in the NFL is in your division, and you pretty much should have beaten them each of the last 3 games, right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
So, I think you're in a really good spot right now moving forward.
I'll throw a bonus one at you because you brought up the fact of the retooling pieces they need to bring in. I think it's common knowledge that running back, tight end, wide receiver are going to be high priority lists in the draft and in free agency this upcoming season, with the announcement basically via the source himself, with Tyreek Hill saying he's basically done in Miami, or at least he was in that moment during the post-game press conference. Do you think, based on what the Broncos need, where they're at, but also from a connectivity standpoint in the locker room, because I think that's an underrated element when you're talking about bringing guys in from the outside, do you see a realistic chance or a reason why the Broncos should go after Tyreek Hill in Miami?
This would, if it ends up happening, it'd probably be like a second or third round pick.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tradable contract, even though it was signed this past offseason. I don't know how available he's going to be, honestly. The Twitter avatar has already been changed back to him in a Dolphins uniform, and then him with his family in Dolphins gear at the facility. He went to his exit interview the next day. He met with general manager Chris Greer. He did not request a trade during that meeting. Now, can things change? For sure. Are things a little cloudy between the two sides? Possibly right now. I covered Tyreek for a long time. I know him well. I would say, as competitive as he is, a little bit of that could have been frustration. I'm experiencing something for the first time. I watched us get eliminated mid-game in something we can't control. And maybe my emotions got the best of me. We'll see what ends up happening. I think it's more indicative that he didn't play in the fourth quarter than his comments, honestly. I think that's worse. But what Sean Payton could do with Tyreek Hill, that would be fun. That would be really fun. You always look, and some people say it this way, specifically evaluators, you look for a basketball team in your skill position guys, whether it's a power forward and a center and a shooting guard and all that. Court's your big body guy. You would have a completely different skill set and someone that could run every route under the sun in Tyreek Hill. I would be something I think you would explore. But again, I think it does come back to what they do at the receiver position. Is it, and I'll ask your opinion, Richie, I've been talking this whole time. Do you want to see the development of Devon Vele, which we've definitely seen some flashes for sure, right? Again on Sunday. And can Troy Franklin, not everybody grows the same way in this league. And Troy Franklin takes step. Do you want to hinder that by going and getting somebody? Or do you want to keep them going and maybe you look at adding a tight end as a different avenue? I think that's going to be Sean's situation he's in. We saw where he was leaning at the start of training camp. Start of the season, really, after training camp, right? I'm going to let these veterans go. And I'm going to play the young guys. We'll see now after this year if that thinking stays the same or if it changes and they start looking at some other free agents. There's a lot. There's some of them. I have a list. There's some of them for sure that are out there.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think that the way that this season has gone has kind of flipped everything that we thought was going to happen or needed to happen throughout the course of the season and into this coming off season kind of on its head, because there was a lot of people here in town who are kind of resigned to the fact that Courtland Sutton is over the hill and he's on his way out. And now you look at a situation where the connectivity between Sutton and Bo Nix is awesome, in the same way that it was with Russell Wilson and Courtland Sutton in his first year. And I think that's a credit to
Courtland's a pretty good receiver.
Yeah.
So
now all of a sudden there was a lot of people, when Courtland held out a mandatory mini camp and it was a restructuring of the contract and looking at the potential of re-signing him, it was like, hey, no way. That's too much money to be paid for a receiver with middling production. And the 10 touchdowns was a fluke. And now there's a reasonable part of me, let alone a lot of other people, I'm sure, who are like, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to have Courtland Sutton around, at least until they can find somebody else. And like you said, maybe Vele takes another step. Troy Franklin, it appears like it's going to be a little bit more of a longer runway to the hopeful projection that we saw from him with their connection at Oregon.
Come on a little bit.
And that is another thing that I think Sean Payton deserves a shout out for, is that he found a way, even though it was his draft pick. Marvin Mims was, I think that was Sean Payton's first real stamp on the draft when he got here.
Yeah.
And to find a place for a guy who it looked like was just going to get lost in the wash a little bit, and he just had potential and had a skill set, but you couldn't figure out how to maximize it.
Remember how frustrated he was during training camp?
Yeah.
How
he
sideways it went.
He looked downtrodden and just unhappy. And, so I think we saw similar vibes from KJ Hamler a little bit toward his tenure here, where it just was like, why it's not working. I can't figure it out. But yeah, huge development push for Marvin Mims. So while I do think they need to add a receiver like Tyreek Hill, and I think that we're already seeing it come in the comments of, stay away from Tyreek. He's a diva. He's this, he's that. I think that's true. But listen, Tyreek also left Kansas City with Mahomes, the baby goat, and went to Miami with Tua Tagovailoa, who's kind of an embroiled quarterback himself. And there was a lot of people doubting him and all that, and really embraced things with Tua Tagovailoa. In fact, that was part of the frustration in his exit interview about why the team wasn't doing so well, is because he didn't have QB1 that was out there getting him targets. So
he had over 1,700 each of the last 2 years before this year.
Yeah, so I think that I, just like all of us, are a little bit enamored with the possibility of a wide receiver like Tyreek Hill, who can take the top off of any defense and just does things at a level that very few, if any, in the NFL can do. But I think if you tossed out, if you dangled T. Higgins in front of me, I'd probably be pretty tempted. Or, there's wide receivers in the draft. I think regardless of what happens, I agree with you. I think Vele needs a little more love.
Yeah, and I don't think this draft is, as I've started to do work on it a little bit, is nothing like this past year at the wide receiver position at all. We know it's not like it at the quarterback position, so everybody in Denver should be pretty pleased with already landing the quarterback, because some of these other teams are scrambling. T. Higgins is probably the belle of the ball in free agency because he's still 25. There's plenty of people I've spoken to, though, Richie, in this league that do not believe he's a 1. There are some people that do, but I would say the majority say that he's a 2. And an inability to stay healthy. He hasn't played a full season. But I think Broncos fans have seen as well, how effective he can be and how good he can be. But your other options are like, I made a list for something else I was doing, but like Chris Godwin and Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper, Hollywood Brown. Cooper Kupp is going to have a very interesting offseason, to my understanding. I would love a Cooper Kupp.
Yeah. Triple Crown guy from just a few years ago.
That's the type of guy Sean can just destroy and needle and pick teams apart with, that type of player.
Kind of that slant god Michael Thomas kind of thing.
It's a very similar thing. You're exactly right. That a guy that can just win early, does exactly what he's supposed to do, catches everything, moves the chains. I mean, I'm getting excited right now. Even
I was going to say,
Sean Payton working with Cooper Kupp would be just like really just like a match made in heaven, honestly.
I was literally just thinking to myself, like, the fact that these are the conversations we're having right now ahead of a playoff matchup just makes me almost giddy with the way that the Broncos perception in town has just flipped in a matter of a couple of months.
Yeah.
So just to
the bottom, by the way, too. The money probably would not change because the deal was signed this past offseason, right? It was I think like $95 million was $60 guaranteed for 3 years. The end of the guarantees are after the 2025 season. The money wouldn't probably change. The compensation, I think he's due like $25 million next season, which like doesn't like, it's not insane. That's just guaranteed money. It might be end up having to pay some other stuff with it, but probably a second or third round pick. I would probably say, is what it would take, probably to get a deal done.
I think there's fair consideration there too, because you look at a second, third round pick. If you're getting top tier production from a guy like Tyreek Hill, that's a steal, and that's a no brainer, even when you factor in the cash considerations. And the Broncos, who are still going to be coming off the meat and potatoes end of the Russell Wilson dead cap and all of that, they found a way, taking on the largest dead cap hit in NFL history. The largest total dead cap in the NFL this year, they found a way to extend Garrett Bowles and sign guys in free agency and all that. So I don't think that
get your visa up for the voidable years, Richie. The Sean Payton voidable years. They've come to Denver. They lived rent free in all of our heads down in New Orleans, and whoever's getting the head coaching job has a mess to clean up down there, salary cap wise, and are walking into a difficult situation. But Sean won a lot of games there, and
he did. And I think
the voidable stuff has come here to Denver for sure with some of the contracts. But you're right. I mean, they 90 million, what, 91 or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
NFL high this year. They're not in a terrible spot, honestly. Like when you like compartmentalize, right, that amount, and that it's going to be like, smaller next year, and then the Russ's situation's gone. Like, they're in a decent spot with a lot of their contracts. They're not underwater in really any contracts.
Trey, what else we got for James here? James, do you think Denver trading out of the first round to get more draft stock? What do you think about trading out of the first round? I hate that personally, but I understand the logic.
Yeah, it's hard because the first 18 are already in line, right? The picks. And so we don't know where Denver are coming. They could be 19, honestly. We could see what ends up happening. But that back half, I don't want to speak too early, but those are mostly second round picks. And I think this year is going to be no different. I mean, if you're picking in the mid 20s those are a lot of teams. They won't admit to you on, the next day they'll go, got exactly what we wanted. We had a first round grade.
Yes, exactly.
Guys.
A first round grade.
There are a lot of guys in the 20s that the teams will not admit have a second round grade on those players. So trading back and still getting a second round player is not the end of the world. I think you have to have specific things you're looking for. This draft is light in some capacity. Like, if the position you need, and say it's like tight end, there's Warren's taken and there's a drop off that's just extraordinary, maybe you trade back from what your needs are. I just think your board would dictate that. But I do think they have fewer needs, which allows more flexibility on draft day.
And I'll say this too, if there was ever two guys with opposite philosophies, but both the same core interest, which is being mobile in the draft, I think George Paton loves to trade back and amass more pieces in the war chest. Whereas Sean Payton, as we've seen him do multiple times just in his first two drafts here in Denver, loves to move up and go get his guy. Yeah, so I think that there's credible, intel there that it's possible.
That's true. And I would say a lot of it is having those two on the same page, which we've seen some teams over the last couple of days, why that has not worked out, and there's not cohesion between the two, and there's not simpatico, if you will. Look at the Chargers and what they did. They, in the top of the second round, end up moving up with New England, and New England moves back. Do you remember who those two picks were?
I don't.
They both wanted a receiver, and Chargers move up and take Ladd McConkey. And New England traded back and ends up taking Jalen Polk.
Oh, geez.
I think Ladd might have one game. Honestly, one Ladd game on his game log might be better than Polk's entire season. I don't think he's done anything this year. So if there is somebody you love, like the Chargers loved Ladd for the fit that they had, I don't mind trading up a few spots. I mean, that was a very small trade within a handful of picks that they made. But that's my point of trading back or trading forward, and especially if you're at the back end of the first, you moving to the top of the second is not the worst thing in the world either. Specifically, if somebody's trying to move up, and this could be a situation, Richie, where after the first two quarterbacks are gone, there might be a real long wait. And if somebody's looking for a quarterback and wants that fifth year of the quarterback contract and wants to take Quinn Ewers at the end of the first round, or you're sitting there in the 20s and they want to come up and take them, then that's something you can find a partner to go back with, and you don't really mind. It's part of the runs that happen within the draft.
And the last time that the Broncos did trade out of the first round, if I'm not mistaken, they ended up with Derek Wolfe. So I think
I saw him on Sunday.
Yeah.
He had a tattoo on the line. Did you know
that's
this?
right. I did. I saw it on his social media that they had to get a tattoo in the posterior region that said "Let's ride" based on who won the bet.
And he won the bet. He said they'd win 10 games. And yeah, tattoo artist was waiting at Wolf's house, he told me, to do it after
So
the game.
funny.
Yeah.
Only Derek.
Oh,
James, as it relates to this weekend's game, how do the Broncos use their running backs at the start of the postseason here? Is Jaleel the RB1 and Javonte on third down? Will Tyler Bidet be available? What's your vibe?
Jaleel's really picked up steam, I think, over the last couple of weeks. I also would say, though, that, like, I know it's backups, but Javonte had a really good game on Sunday. He did. Had a really good game on Sunday. And the one thing that I've been waiting for is that we know, and it's been made a big deal here in Denver, right? Like, he's such a great pass protector. Like,
yeah.
You know, it's kind of an odd thing to brag so heavily about.
Right.
But if you are good at that, you should be a really good pass catcher, too. And you're much more effective as a player. And the offense becomes much less predictable and some of the things that they can do with you as a player. But it looks like Jaleel has become more of RB1 for sure. But they've given us no indication, Richie, tell me if I'm wrong, of how they're going to rotate their backs and how this is going to go. Like, the minute we start getting some thought, like, oh, they used Estime a bunch in that,
exactly.
that run at the end of the Chiefs game. He's the guy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Then he disappears again. And so it is really funny the way this run game has operated. I think it's hard to have a consistent run game when you sit 3 wide in shotgun all the time. I think it's hard to run the football that way. I know there's some frustration from players on the offensive side of the ball that they don't run it more. But this is the offense that Sean has created, and it's the one that they play within. I would still say, and I don't see why it would change, your running game is going to be trying to do a handful of different things, and that includes Marvin Mims, and that includes Jaleel, and that includes probably everyone, it seems like.
Well, you're definitely not wrong. You're definitely not wrong on the misdirection, or every time it feels like we're picking up a trail, Sean Payton comes and kicks the sand around so you can't follow it. And the only thing I can think of is that that's his intention, and he's basically doing to us what he's hopefully trying to do to the other team, which is give them no kind of scent to pick up on as they game plan throughout the week. But yeah, I think that I mean, come on, as an offensive lineman, why would you, when you run the football, you get to be the aggressor and the attacker and get on your heels and get 100%. Forward. As a pass protector, you have to wait to get hit. And I think that's why it's no surprise that most offensive lines want to run the football, and the Broncos are no exception.
Yeah, and real quick, I'll just add, you want to keep Josh Allen off the field.
Yeah.
Like, I would.
I said that yesterday. I was talking with James Marilant, and I said that I was talking about gleaming things of optimism that came out of a game against, a B squad in Kansas City.
What do you say about the optimism?
Oh, he gave his classic half in, half out of like, no, it's great. Listen, I'm almost ready to commit. I just go beat Buffalo. It's like, oh yeah, just go beat one of the best teams in the NFL as a massive underdog in the playoffs. It's fine. But what I said was, I was looking for moments of optimism to glean out of that game that's kind of hard to read when you're talking about backups versus starters and things like that. And one of the things that I took was that 11-minute and 5-second scoring drive that the Broncos had. And to me, I said, if you can, I know it was against backups, but if you can find a way to do that against a team like Buffalo, you can beat them. That's how you beat a team that just on paper is genuinely better than you, which Buffalo is, and we see teams try to scheme that against Patrick Mahomes all the time, and Tom Brady before him, and Aaron Rodgers, and all that. If you've got a guy, especially at the quarterback position, that's just a game changer, sometimes the best defense is a good offense, in that respect.
Yeah, it's clock management. It's all of that. I see this one down here. In your opinion, James, how does our offense stack up with the Bills defense? I would say there's a couple of weaknesses within this Bills defense that I think are in the Broncos' favor, Richie, honestly.
Do tell.
They are not very good on third down, which is good because the Broncos have struggled on third down. Like, I would be really nervous if they were facing a team that defensively was just outstanding on third down. Like, I would think that'd be a recipe for absolute disaster. You have a couple of 3-and-outs against a Bills team that has Josh Allen, like we were just talking about, and it's like bang, 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 you're down 21 in like 7 minutes. You know what I mean? So I do think their issues on third down, which are real as a unit, help an offense that has struggled on third down. I think that for sure. They've been inconsistent against the run, maybe equally as inconsistent as the Broncos have been in terms of just running it. They do struggle against the run at times, and they have some leaky opportunities that happen. I would say the thing I would keep an eye on is like Gregory Rousseau can go on a tear, man, and he can really impact. But I think the D-line, I think the offensive line has played great this year. I think they've had a really good year. I think Matt Milano, if he starts to find his footing, which he's been obviously a little sluggish coming back from the injury, if you see the old Matt Milano that we used to see, that's a game changer for this Bills defense. If he's still just a little bit sluggish compared to what we're used to seeing, I think that helps Denver for sure. The secondary has definitely been leaky, and I think that's another part where I think I want to run the ball. I think you want to run the ball, Richie. I think all of Broncos country wants to. I think Sean could look at some of the issues in that secondary and go, Bo's going to light it up. And I'm a little nervous about that because, again, a couple of 3-and-outs, and Josh Allen can hurt you real quick, and games can get out of hand real quick. I look at that Niners game in the snow, and it was over in 2 seconds up there in Buffalo. So I do think there's some positives for Denver because some of the weaknesses match up, and you're not getting completely blown out in some of these matchups.
On that note, as we continue to rack up a couple more questions here, Sean Payton has not been shy at a lot of points this season about being like a riverboat gambler, very aggressive on offense. I mean, we definitely saw it against the Chiefs in this last game, but that's a little bit skewed because of the daunting offense that he's going up against. Do you see Sean Payton being as aggressive as we've seen him in the past in terms of going forward on fourth down, even if it's in that kind of gray area between, the 35 and the 35 or the 40s, because he knows what the firepower on the other end is able to do?
Yeah, I mean, the only example you have really is Baltimore this year, right? And man, were they aggressive. I mean, they were unbelievably aggressive. But I would say this is a different team in Denver than played in Baltimore early in the year. I definitely think that. I think his aggression will be somewhat dictated by how early on he sees this defense play against Josh Allen. If he sees his defense holding their own and he sees them getting stops, he sees them getting pressure against a really good offensive line. That's another thing in this game. These are two of the best and healthiest offensive lines we've seen this year. Like, both of these units have been very healthy.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Oh, a little beat with it?
Yeah, we got a drum kit over there. Anyways, I would say if they start getting pressure early, you can see them be disruptive. You can see that VJ's plan is, it's working. I think that might take a little bit of your aggression out. I do think the Broncos have outstanding special teams. Do you think that's talked about enough? I think they've.
No, I don't think it gets talked. I think special teams just overall is not talked about a lot. But I do think that
in the postseason, it is extremely important.
And I do think that given how abysmal the Broncos special teams has been for large portions of the last, 8 seasons or so, the fact that it's turned around to the degree that it has probably should be talked about a little more.
And in playoff games, it's really important.
Last couple of questions here. We talked about VJ and the potential that, he may be gaining more interest with interviews, and whether it's something that happens this year or maybe it's a next cycle kind of thing as he continues to stack. How aggressive do you see the Broncos being, to David's question here, in trying to retain VJ as one of Sean Payton's top assistants?
Well, I don't think VJ walks for a lateral move, even though we have some defensive coordinator openings. Right? We have Gus Bradley in Indianapolis who's been let go. We have Lou Anarumo in Cincinnati who's been let go.
Which we saw Ejiro Evero do prior to the Sean Payton regime, so it's not unheard of.
And that was when there was an entire coaching coaching change that was going to be put in place. And so that's a little bit of a different situation. I don't see VJ walking away from this group of guys that he absolutely loves. Now, if he gets a head coaching job, it's
sure.
Broncos can't stop that. But yeah, he's coming back unless he gets a head job. I would say it's mostly pointing towards VJ is coming back to the Denver Broncos in 2025. I think that's a near certainty. There's only 5 openings, possibly 6 if Dallas changes. I think it might be 5 still.
Yeah, and with competition like Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn and, Mike Vrabel and
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the same. I mean, Liam Cohen's out there. Robert Saleh getting an interview down in Jacksonville. Kind of interesting. But yeah, I would say he comes back, and he's not going to leave for a lateral move. I would say that too.
All right, Trey, we'll end on this last question here. My question is, what do the Broncos do at inside linebacker? Do you bring back Cody Barton and hope that Singleton recovers? Do you draft a young guy or go after Nick Bolton in free agency?
Nick Bolton's outstanding. They're going to pay Nick Bolton, and they're going to keep Nick Bolton. But I think you got to constantly start, I think, reevaluating the position. This is one of my it's not a pet peeve. It's just something I love to talk to people around the league about, because the position itself and its importance in terms of the draft capital and dollars you put towards it varies so dramatically across the NFL. And there are teams that value it at such a high rate, like, say, Nick Bolton's Chiefs, and they have a number of really good linebackers. Say the Ravens, or the 49ers, and the amount of money and resources they've put for athletic sideline to sideline linebackers. A funny one is Philadelphia. Like, Howie Roseman has never valued the inside linebacker position ever. And then look at how good this defense is when they finally got a real player in there in Zach Bond. And it shows you the athleticism of that spot and how important it is. I think the Broncos are lacking that athlete on the other side. And it used to be, Richie, honestly, where do I find my safety / corner / linebacker hybrid to match up with these tight ends? Right? Like, where do I find who would it used to be? Like an
Isaiah Simmons type kind of thing.
Well, that's one that hasn't really worked out.
Yeah,
like a Derwin James
profile wise.
Like a Derwin James or somebody like that can do it. Now it's almost like, no, I need the 235-pound blazer at linebacker. Look at Alex Anzalone and his return and what that
unbelievable
did to that defense.
Everybody wants to be a dog.
Yeah. So but him and Thomas Brown are like the only ones that can talk about
that. Scar was so gnarly,
just unbelievable. And so, yeah, I think their philosophy at the position should change a little bit. And I think you have to go start looking at some athletes and try to get more athletic at the position. So I don't know if that really answers your question. I think Cody Barton's been a pleasant surprise compared to his past, I would say, career in the NFL. I think you need to start getting deeper, and that's the other part. I'll end on this is Kansas City has like 4 of them.
Yeah.
Like, if that doesn't show you kind of something that you can do in terms of moving guys around and their importance to it, I know scheme dictates the importance of your middle linebacker, but I think the Broncos are well aware they need to get more athletic in the middle of the field.
Yeah, and frankly, they haven't really had one since the Super Bowl years, the Peyton Manning years with
Danny Trevathan,
and Brandon Marshall and Todd Davis and those kind of guys. But I think it, what it sounds like your point is, and I think I agree with it, is I think the philosophy behind it changes and hinges on whether or not you can find a guy. If once you draft Devin White in the draft, suddenly you're like, you know what? I think we can work around a stud middle linebacker, and you kind of build outwardly from there. So I hope that they find one. I would love to have an Alex Anzalone or a Nick Bolton or any of the names that we mentioned.
Very different too. Like back to Philly, like Nakobe Dean is small. Like, he's not very big, but Nakobe Dean can get anywhere on the field. And so, I think you got to start looking at all of these. And the good thing about it is, with good scouting and good player evaluation, these aren't top of the draft type of players. These aren't gone in the first half of the first round. These are second, third, fourth round picks. You know what I mean? And so if you can target a couple of them and hit, it's not like you have to sell the farm to get one.
Yep. And for a team that's got pretty relentless production from their pass rushing group, and a team whose cornerbacks and secondaries have held their own for a lot of the season, if you're telling me that I could add a middle piece in there that would prevent teams from just kind of trying to cushion and soft spot them every week, I would be very excited about that. James, thank you so much for fielding all of our questions, for joining us as you do every Thursday, and I can't wait to catch up with you next week, man.
I can't wait. Hopefully maybe it's after an upset. I mean, this game, I think, has become very interesting.
You want to give a prediction on the way out? What are you feeling?
No, I don't think they're going to win, but...
That's fair. That's fair.
Listen, I don't think that's the point of this game, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, real quick before we leave, you mentioned that this is that getting there and they're ahead of schedule in terms of this turn. Just getting Bo Nix a playoff experience. Real quick story. I'm in the locker room talking to Zach Allen, one of my favorite people in this league, and we're talking one of the few guys on this team with postseason experience. And he was like, "It's so much faster, man. I'm excited because it's just the whole game moves quicker." And I go, "You better go talk to Garrett Bowles over there."
Exactly.
Because Bowlesy, I was talking to him on Thursday, and he's like, "It's really faster." And I was like, "Yes, everything is faster." He's like, "Wow, you sure?" I was like, "Yes, everything is. Every coach, every player has told me faster." That's the things that you're going to need all of these guys to witness firsthand in the postseason. And even if you check that box, it's a win for this season that they got that experience of what the postseason feels like and everything that comes with it.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is an underrated element of the result in Kansas, or against Kansas City this past weekend, is guys like Garrett Bowles, who've been here, the longest tenured, if not, whatever. He's the longest tenured and hasn't seen the postseason. Cortland Sutton, who's fought all these years and since 2018 hasn't done it. And then it makes your heart break even more for a guy like Justin Simmons, who was that guy from the year after the Super Bowl. And then his first year gone, the Broncos go to the playoffs, and his Atlanta Falcons, who were kind of the offseason darling, come up just short.
Wow,
So
I can't believe you did that at the end of this. Such a nice guy.
It just makes my heart breaks for him, because he was an Iron Man for so many years for that. But obviously we wish him nothing but the best, and all the well wishes and all the positive vibes going into that locker room at Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit, as they head into face Buffalo this weekend. James, thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah, see you, Richie, buddy.
Everybody else, have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and get back to work.
Yeah.